a complex that hosted an unlikely Cold War matchup.
It was a real barn burner. The fact that the Soviets could match them is really quite impressive.
A British facility caught up in a battle between trade unions and the Iron Lady.
She was determined to use every weapon in her arsenal to crush them.
And a Gothic tower in Memphis, plagued from its inception.
This is where they made a crucial mistake, and it was one that would haunt the building for the rest of its life.
In Vilnius, Lithuania's capital, a derelict structure evokes memories of a remarkable sporting moment.
We come across this plaza, but it's kind of falling apart. Looming over all of it is a grand building with a very distinctive design, almost like a spaceship that's come and landed here.
It's concrete, it's brutalist in style, it has all the feelings of a Soviet building.
Inside, it quickly becomes apparent this is some type of arena.
In some ways, it recalls a little bit Lincoln Center in New York City, the Great Concert Hall, or even the Sydney Opera House. This is a building with real aspirations for greatness.
Built to showcase Soviet excellence, an American billionaire ensured it would host a unique Cold War showdown.
Landing deep behind enemy lines, this group of Americans were treated as heroes.
The players must have thought this was the strangest thing they'd ever seen.
July 1988. Thousands of Lithuanians have gathered outside the building, filling the plaza.
There were a lot of militias everywhere and a few checkpoints.
But these aren't protesters. They're basketball fans, desperate to get inside and catch a glimpse of NBA superstars, making a rare appearance behind the Iron Curtain. Gintaras Krapikas was one of the lucky ones.
We all knew about NBA basketball, however, we never had the opportunity to watch it. No television here ever broadcast it, and it was like a myth. It was incredible for the fans to be able to watch them play live. Everyone was just in awe.
But how did an NBA team come to play in this arena during the Cold War? Its seeds were sown back in the 1920s, when Lithuanian Americans imported basketball into the country. Journalist Vydas Mačiulis has been covering the nation's favorite game for 60 years.
In Lithuania, we call basketball our second religion. Everyone loves it, everyone respects it, and it's 102 years old.
The sport caught on quickly, and Lithuania was crowned European champions in 1937 and 1939. But these glory days were soon cut short.
In 1940, shortly after World War II had broken out, the Soviet Union occupied Lithuania, and the national team was absorbed into the Soviet system.
By the mid-1960s, Soviet communism reached its zenith.
The Soviets were ahead in space flight. Their political system seemed to be gaining power around the world. Their sports teams were some of the best in the world. The Soviet leaders really wanted to project this image of success to the rest of the world and to their own citizens.
And they embarked on a series of ambitious projects across its empire. Here in Lithuania, Construction began in 1965 on this, the Vilnius Palace of Concerts and Sports. It hosted a range of events and sports, including the country's beloved basketball.
Oh, matau.
I see the main VIP stand. I was there many times.
Ir aš ten buvau, ir ne vieną kartą.
Sitting alongside Soviet leaders, it wasn't always the most relaxed atmosphere.
Mes buvom nedrąsus plot.
We were too reserved to clap.
Nedrąsus šaukt.
We were too shy to cheer for the team that we supported.
Ir
And we were afraid to cheer for the musical band.
bijodom, gal nesupras, kai koncertuoja muzikiniai kolektyvai.
In the 1980s, with the Cold War beginning to thaw, the Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev instituted a series of reforms that promoted a new level of transparency and openness across the Soviet Union.
Gorbachev chose to release the pressure where he could, almost like letting some steam out of a boiler that's close to exploding. So he began to allow cultural exchanges.
In the United States, Ted Turner, a media mogul and owner of the Atlanta Hawks, was closely watching international affairs.
Turner was a real character, real entrepreneur. With CNN, he invented the whole idea of 24-hour cable news, and he had a real idealistic streak. And he especially was focused on doing what he could to sort of bridge this divide between the West and the Soviet Union.
In 1988, the Atlanta Hawks set off to cross the Iron Curtain and play a series of 3 exhibition matches against the Soviet national team.
The second of the 3 matches would take place here. Excitement spread throughout the basketball-crazed nation.
I couldn't believe it. I started looking for tickets very early because I realized what it meant to Lithuania and what it meant for basketball. And I did well because the tickets were almost impossible to come by.
Although the arena only held 5,000, over 1 million people competed for tickets.
In fact, it said that they went for the equivalent of a month's wages on the black market. So the authorities decided to also sell tickets to the practice sessions. And the citizens of Vilnius just packed the stands watching these players practice in absolute silence. It was as if they were in church. The players must have thought this was the strangest thing they'd ever seen.
On July 27, 1988, the 2 teams stepped out onto this court for the much-anticipated showdown. It would prove a classic encounter, won by a slam-dunking legend. In July 1988, NBA stars of the Atlanta Hawks found themselves behind the Iron Curtain, playing a series of exhibition games in the USSR. Game 2 was held in the basketball-mad country of Lithuania.
It was a real barn burner. This is a real hard-fought competition. This Soviet team, these guys were not pushovers.
On the Atlanta Hawks was all-star Dominique Wilkins, one of the greatest slam dunkers in NBA history.
There were moments where our jaws dropped because we were so impressed by the opportunities created, the bravery and the athleticism that we hadn't seen or faced before.
But the Soviet team just kept coming back. They were known for their extraordinary level of physical conditioning. After a nail-biting match, the buzzer went, ending the game, and the score was knotted at 92-92.
Now it was time for another shock for the American team. The Soviets thought, okay, that's fine, the game's a tie. Isn't that nice? And the Americans were saying, there's no ties in basketball.
Eventually, the Soviets relented, and they agreed to extend the match into overtime.
At this point, NBA legend Dominique Wilkins took the initiative.
Then in overtime, their biggest star, Dominique Wilkins, took the ball and in a short time scored 8 points. And after a very intense fight, won the game.
The final score was Hawks 110, USSR 105.
The Hawks' victory was a highlight for this facility. But soon after, the palace became the focal point for a rising independence movement. The Soviet House of Cards came tumbling down.
After the fall of the Soviet Union, Lithuania is broke, and they don't have the money to support their reconstructed national basketball team.
The 1992 Olympics were coming up, and it was the first time in almost half a century for Lithuania to play its favorite national sport as an independent country.
Gintaras was one of the players who answered the fledgling nation's call.
The team came to play for their country for nothing, for no salary.
As well as playing for free, the team desperately searched for sponsors to help them fulfill their dreams of representing their country at the Olympics.
And this becomes kind of a cause célèbre for many people in the US. A lot of NBA players thought very fondly of the Lithuanians and their team, so they lobbied to raise money to help them compete. The Grateful Dead, of all bands, takes an interest in the plight of the Lithuanian team. They contribute money for new uniforms and hire a great designer to design this new kit.
It was an incredible experience to play for Lithuania, wearing the t-shirt that said Lithuania.
At the Olympics, the Lithuanian team did really well. They made it all the way to the semifinals.
It's only when they come up against the American Dream Team that they're defeated. In the end, they came away with the bronze.
We had a huge motivation to become better, and we wanted to show that to the whole world. Olympic Games and becoming independent gave us that chance.
This was a turning point for Lithuanian basketball players, proving themselves on an international stage. Arvydas Sabonis was one of the first Lithuanians to join the NBA. First drafted in 1986, the Soviets refused to let him leave for the US. It wasn't until nearly a decade later that he finally joined the league. But players like Sabonis helped pave the way for the many Lithuanians, including his son, to become NBA stars. And although the palace fell into disrepair and closed in 2004, the match against the Atlanta Hawks is fondly remembered as the high point of this stadium's history.
I was in the peak years as an active athlete. Looking at those players who played like that gives you motivation. And that match is the most memorable for me.
In the English village of Clipston, a towering structure stirs memories of a fateful battle with a powerful leader.
We're in the centre of England, near the city of Nottingham. It feels quiet and rural.
On what looks like the village green are two enormous metal monuments reaching into the sky.
It feels quite odd that these vast structures are marooned in the middle of a field. Could this have once been part of a much larger operation?
Delving into the bowels of this beast, a strange sight appears underground.
Directly beneath the tower is a large circular pad, possibly concealing something.
Exploring this place, you'd have no idea of the riches that are buried beneath it, or the controversies that would surround them.
This structure symbolizes one of the greatest social battles in Britain's history. It was a brutal fight between capitalism and socialism, Margaret Thatcher versus the trade unions.
Many have never forgiven the Iron Lady.
For nearly 30 years, Doug Broadfoot relied on this facility for his livelihood.
This was the main place of employment for the village. Apart from this, there was nothing. There was just 1 or 2 local shops.
When Doug first worked here, this was part of an industry Britain couldn't function without. Coal had powered the Industrial Revolution, and hundreds of coal mines were scattered across the land.
So much so that in the 19th century, it was mining 2/3 of the world's coal.
This is the Clipston Colliery. When it opened in 1922, it proved to be a coal mining powerhouse.
It quickly became one of the most productive mines in Britain, extracting more than 4,000 tons per day by the 1940s.
But this was a decade of dramatic change. In 1947, as part of the post-World War II shakeup, the coal industry was nationalized.
The first day of a new era.
Its new owner was the British government, and they wouldn't always see eye to eye with the powerful trade union, which represented around 1 million miners.
The National Union of Mine Workers, or NUM, who had long represented miners across the country, supported the nationalization. But eventually, the two sides would come to an almighty clash.
In the 1950s, these 2 giant towers, or headstalks, were installed. At the time, they were the tallest in Europe and allowed access to deeper coal seams. An elevator shaft would take the men more than 3,000 feet underground.
The elevator could travel up to 27 miles per hour. Just imagine hurtling at that speed for that long, down towards the center of the earth.
And down in the depths, the conditions were brutal.
You could be killed by cave-ins, dangerous gases, fire, and even a condition called black lung.
There was dangers lurking around every corner. So you had to be on your toes and alert. You looked after each other down there.
Despite digging deeper to save their jobs, by the 1980s, Doug and his colleagues were increasingly in fear of the mine closing down. Coal was being replaced by new energy sources such as nuclear, gas, and oil.
By 1984, the number of British miners had fallen from over 1 million 50 years earlier to barely 200,000.
As the numbers of unemployed rose, the miners' union was gradually becoming more radical in its outlook.
More and more pits were being closed, setting the stage for an almighty war between the miners and a new prime minister, famous for getting her own way.
In 1979, Margaret Thatcher was elected Prime Minister. She planned to close inefficient mines and begin to depend on cheaper imports.
She also believed that trade unions like the NUM had too much power. She became determined to break their influence.
Ready for battle, in March 1984, Thatcher announced a new wave of pit closures, with the loss of 20,000 jobs. It triggered a strike which quickly spread around the country. Miners arrived at Clipston to find picket lines of strikers blocking them from going to work.
And I came down, and there were some pickets there. And asked our support, and so I says, yeah, because we were fighting for the jobs. It wasn't just our job, it was their jobs as well. From then on, we didn't really look back.
Initially, 3/4 of miners across the country joined the strike. At Clipston, Doug himself was in the minority, as most chose to continue working.
Thatcher seized on this by idolizing the working miners, describing them as heroes who simply wanted to go to work rather than submit to the threats of the strikers.
Reports appear of those who've been intimidated because they seek to go to their place of work, to pursue their occupation, and to support their families.
As well as attempting to divide the miners, Thatcher mobilized an army of police. The dispute was threatening to escalate into all-out war. In 1984, Clipston coal mine was at the heart of a battle between British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and the Coal Miners' Union, or NUM. The Iron Lady unleashed an army of police to crush a national strike and break the pickets.
They set up roadblocks throughout Nottinghamshire to prevent any suspected strikers from travelling.
Clipston continued to operate under police protection, and the entire village was locked down.
There was literally hundreds and thousands of police in this area. It was absolutely flooded with police stopping the pickets coming in. And this was happening all over the country as well.
Some criticised Thatcher for using the police as a paramilitary wing of the state.
They weren't here to keep the law. They were here to make sure that those who wanted to work got into work and they kept producing coal. Nothing else.
Scenes of violence played out on TV screens every night, shocking the British public.
Nearly 300 were arrested and more than 200 pickets and policemen injured.
But an ugly streak of violence has disfigured our television screens night after night.
Many strikers felt the police were unnecessarily brutal, with beatings and random arrests, something Doug personally witnessed.
The majority of miners are still on strike.
They got strikers sacked, arrested for doing absolutely nothing, and some of them have never worked since. Some of the miners, their lives were ruined with injuries as well. It happened here at Clipston where one or two of the lads got arrested, and sorry, but they did absolutely nothing. It was all trumped up charges.
Thatcher had also changed the law so that strikers' families were prevented from receiving emergency benefits.
The Leightons and other striking families have clubbed together to make sure they have all they need.
The families of strikers like Doug were forced to rely on the NUM's charity soup kitchens.
But the union's charity funds had almost run out. More and more desperate miners were starting to return to work.
The strike had lasted an entire year.
In the years after the strike, the pace of closures was accelerated, with many pit villages falling into deep poverty.
Clipston survived this turbulent period and continued operating, but with a much smaller workforce, before closing down in 2003. Today, there are just a handful of coal mines in Britain, employing less than 500 people. But Clipston is set to find new life as an event center and museum. In southwest Tennessee, a monolithic structure towers over a city with a proud musical heritage.
Memphis is a bustling town on the Mississippi River, and it's filled with country music and blues and jazz, and it's a really vibrant, happening city.
More than anything, it is known as the birthplace of rock and roll. Right in the heart of it all is this towering monolith. It is an imposing structure. It looks strong and sturdy.
Trying to piece together what this place was used for isn't easy. There are dentist chairs, old medical equipment, signs for attorneys' offices, collection offices. There's even a bathroom with leopard print wallpaper on the walls.
Once known as the Queen of Memphis, this place attracted rock and roll royalty.
He had a company called Stars, Inc. on the 19th floor, and he was the manager of Elvis Presley and Johnny Cash.
This was the biggest, the best, the most luxurious building Memphis had ever seen.
It was designed as a monument to success, but its founders sowed the seeds of its destruction at its inception.
This is where they made a crucial mistake, and it was one that would haunt the building for the rest of its life.
Like many locals, Stuart Harris was drawn to the mystery of this vast, cavernous structure. He still remembers the day it was closed down.
The building was abandoned when I was 9 years old. And I always wondered what was going on in there. It stood out to me as being very unique. It felt almost like a 30-story haunted house.
While it looks monolithic, it's packed full of surprises.
So after decades of wondering what the inside looked like, I had an opportunity to visit it. And it was so mysterious, in some ways not at all what I expected. When it was built, this lobby was neo-Gothic. It was very grand, high ceilings, bronze rosettes, leaded glass, no expense spared.
The concept was a city within a city. An office block that had everything a worker might need, all housed in one building.
It had a cigar stand, a newsstand, a barber shop, beauty shop, lawyers, dentists, doctors, everything you could possibly imagine.
$2.5 million were pumped into its construction, which began in 1928. Its owners were two wealthy Texans, Ross S. Sterling and Wyatt Hendrick. They decided to merge their last names, and the Steric building was born. 900 offices, accommodating 5,000 office workers, spread across 29 floors. It was born in the Roaring '20s, an era sometimes known as the Jazz Age.
Memphis is absolutely booming, and it's the center of the cotton trade. Between 1880 and 1920, over 70% of the cotton in America was harvested within 200 miles of Memphis. And that meant a lot of money and a lot of jobs and a lot of new buildings.
This real estate boom was seized on by Sterling and Hendrick.
And being Texans, and Texans either go big or go home, decided they were going to make a splash, and they picked the busiest corner in central downtown, the corner of Madison and 3rd Street, which is now B.B. King. One of the things they added were 8 high-speed elevators. These elevators were manned by 8 ladies in dresses and bows who would greet visitors and act almost as a concierge to take them to whatever floor they were visiting.
By the 40s and 50s, this building is absolutely at full occupancy.
Among these occupants were some famous rock and rollers. A dilapidated tower in Memphis, designed as a city within a city, once hosted an eclectic mix of businesses.
Sterrick was home to lots of local radio stations, and it was also where Bob Neal, a famous early DJ, had his offices and studios.
He had a company called Stars Inc. on the 19th floor, and he was the manager of Elvis Presley and Johnny Cash.
He set up the King's first live performance here in Memphis and put on local variety shows where you could see these soon-to-be global superstars for just 50 cents a ticket.
Bob helped Elvis found Elvis Presley Enterprises and is the managing company of Graceland, Elvis's mansion in South Memphis.
But with Elvis clearly heading for the big time, Neal, tired of life on the road, decided not to renew his contract. And the now infamous Colonel Tom Parker took over. Times were good, and the owner of the Empire State Building bought the tower. But urban depopulation that impacted cities across America in the 1960s and 70s was compounded in Memphis by the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968.
As more people began to leave the city and move to the suburbs or take their offices elsewhere, it really began this process of a death by 1,000 cuts.
In 1973, the bank foreclosed on the property, and it was taken back by the lender. This brought attention to the original contract, signed by Sterling and Hendrick in 1926. And it was far from conventional.
So incredibly, they didn't buy the land where their skyscraper would be. They simply leased it for 99 years.
If anyone wanted to make improvements to this building, why would they want to do that when in 2025, all of the improvements, every dime they spent on the building would go entirely back to the family that owned the land? No one was willing to make that investment.
But Stewart is part of an ownership group that has managed to break the curse of the 99-year lease.
In 2023, we were able to come to an agreement with all parties to dissolve the entire lease structure and create a fee simple structure of ownership so that lease is no longer standing.
Plans are underway to convert the tower into an apartment block, combined with hotels and restaurants.
We really hope that it's going to be a catalytic project that really radiates activity from here around the neighborhood and really affects the core of downtown Memphis.
On the outskirts of Kuala Terengganu in eastern Malaysia, the bustling urban sprawl quickly gives way to nature.
You don't have to stray too far from the city before things start getting very remote. I'm talking hot, dense jungle.
In a small clearing set back from a winding river, you come across a curious collection of wooden buildings.
7 different structures, set on stilts, are connected by walkways.
The construction looks old-fashioned, but the fact that it's made of timber makes it really hard to date it.
In this tropical climate, nature is rapidly reclaiming what once belonged to the jungle.
So some of the planks have rotted away, the structure's starting to collapse, and it's just really hard to tell what it was used for.
However, when you enter the building, there are surprising signs of modernity. You look around and you see beautifully tiled bathrooms, a fridge, even an air conditioning unit.
It's also filled with the remnants of what looks to be perhaps some textile industry.
This was much more than just a home. This was one man's dream to safeguard his nation's heritage.
But when tragedy struck, his vision was shattered.
I first came here in 1992. There was nothing but the jungle.
Syed Hanafia is a carpenter and helped construct this complex with Tengku Ismail, the man behind a bold and unusual vision.
Tengku Ismail was warm and friendly to the people, approachable and very easy to talk to.
He may have been a man of the people, but he came from royalty.
Tengku actually means prince, which is what he was. He was a prince of the local Terengganu royal family.
While his great-grandfather, Sultan Zainal Abidin III, had ruled over the entire Terengganu province, Ismail was far removed from the direct line to the throne.
Tengku Ismail was born in the 1950s, and being the second cousin to the ruling sultan, he was in no danger of becoming king. But he still grew up with all the trappings of being in an aristocratic family.
That included living in his great-grandfather's royal palace. There, he fell in love with the traditional Malay architecture and culture, including songket, a traditional cloth sewn in silk or cotton, then highlighted with gold or silver thread to create a silky metallic fabric.
In 1970, that passion took him to the Osaka Expo in Japan, where he not only represented Malaysia, but he also displayed the songket cloth for the world.
While in Japan, he took the opportunity to visit the Nijojo Palace, built in 1603. It was a transformative moment.
He was so impressed by what he saw and the way that these wooden structures were preserved that he decided he would do the same thing for his own cultural heritage.
Tengku Ismail once lamented to me that the traditional Terengganu houses were going extinct. He wanted to preserve them.
So he decided to salvage traditional Terengganu homes and unify them into one structure to imitate an 18th century royal palace, just like the one he grew up in. The ambitious project was called Pura Tanjung Sabtu, which is a combination of the local village name and the word for palace. In 1992, he began scouring Terengganu for these traditional wooden houses.
These very old houses are put together with no nails, no screws. It's just been all cut and built by very skilled workers. So what he has to do is take them all apart, transport them to his space, and then put them all together.
So the carpenters have to be extremely skilled at cutting the different wooden pieces so they slide together and fit snugly without seam or lock.
Part of Ismail's project was attempting to revive his beloved songket.
On the ground floor, he had an entire area dedicated to the manufacture and display of the fabric.
When complete in 1996, it opened as his personal residence, but also a museum and a hotel. And in 2007, his efforts appeared to have paid off. He was nominated for the Aga Khan Architecture Award. The awards celebrate design excellence in societies with predominantly Muslim populations.
Tengku Ismail described it as one of the happiest moments of his life. Finally, it seemed as if everything was coming together.
In June 2011, the prince traveled to London for a popular international weaving exhibition. Held at the School of Traditional Arts and supported by King Charles III's charitable foundation, his Songket collection was a central feature. But tragically, the prince died of a heart attack before he left London, and his beloved palace has since fallen into disrepair.
There was some talk of turning it into a heritage site that tourists could visit, but until someone's willing to fund that enterprise, it will continue to decompose.